She heard the shot before she even got the door fully open. The bullet went into the ceiling. Plaster dust fell in a slow white cloud across the glass conference table, and Adele screamed one short, sharp sound she couldn't stop and stumbled back against the doorframe with both hands up. Saem Yoon stood at the far end of the room, gun still raised, eyes locked on her. He didn't look panicked. He didn't look out of control. He looked like a man who had just done exactly what he intended to do and was now waiting to see what happened next. The room on the 32nd floor of the Han Tower went completely still. Then he lowered the gun, slowly, set it on the table between them, sat down, and slid a thick manila folder across the glass toward her. He said, "Close the door, Adele, and sit down. We need to talk about who sent you." Her heart was still slamming against her ribs. She looked at the folder. She looked at the hole in the ceiling. She looked at him. She closed the door. She sat down. Because Adele Nwosu had not survived 7 years in corporate intelligence by running from the rooms that scared her, and because somewhere underneath the adrenaline and the plaster dust, she already knew, had known for weeks, maybe longer, that this moment was coming. She just hadn't expected the gun. To understand what was happening in that room, you have to go back 6 months, to Lagos, to a woman who had spent 7 years doing one of the most dangerous jobs in the world and had exactly one rule that kept her alive: never get personally involved. Adele was a corporate intelligence operative. She had worked in Lagos, London, Dubai, Singapore, and twice in Seoul before this. She was fluent in 4 languages, precise, patient, and capable of becoming whatever a situation required: a consultant, an auditor, a quiet presence in a room that people forgot was occupied. She was very good at her job. She had never broken her one rule. Until now. The Kong organization found her in London in November. Kong was not a corporation. Kong was a criminal network, moving money, information, and leverage through 17 jurisdictions in ways that were almost impossible to trace and completely impossible to prosecute. East Asia, West Africa, the spaces in between. The job was this: the Yoon Group, a major Korean conglomerate, was expanding aggressively into West African markets. Kong wanted to know how. Specifically, they wanted the Yoon Group's internal investment strategy for the next 3 years, not to stop it, to get ahead of it, to be in every market before the Yoon Group arrived. The access point was Saem Yoon, youngest son, 31, recently back from 5 years in New York, smart, unconventional, and, according to Kong's intelligence, somewhat at odds with his father and brothers, potentially susceptible if approached correctly. Adele read the briefing file twice. She said yes. She arrived at Yoon Group headquarters on a Monday in February as a Lagos-based financial consultant specializing in African market entry. The cover was real enough. She had 7 years of genuine financial work behind a parallel professional name, real references, a real portfolio. She was exactly what she appeared to be, except for the reason she was there. Saem was sharper than the briefing file suggested. He asked questions that required real answers, not performance answers. He listened the way people only listen when they are genuinely interested, not when they are being polite. She left the first meeting with a consulting agreement and a second appointment. In the car back to her hotel, she told herself what she always told herself at this stage. It was just a job. What she did not know, what no one at Kong had known, because Saem Yoon had been operating with the kind of careful secrecy that comes from having grown up inside a family where everyone was watching everyone else, was that Saem Yoon had been running his own operation for 14 months. He had suspected his father and oldest brother of financial fraud for 2 years. Not the quiet kind, the catastrophic kind. The kind that, if it came to light through the wrong channels, would not just destroy the Yoon Group but potentially take down several connected institutions and trigger a regulatory crisis. He had spent 14 months building a private case, document by document, quietly engaging a small number of trusted allies, waiting for the right moment and the right mechanism to bring it forward in a way that gave him control of the outcome. He needed an outsider, someone with forensic financial expertise and no internal allegiances, and no reason to be loyal to the family. Someone credible enough to be in the room, but invisible enough to move through it without triggering alarm. When Adele's consulting application crossed his desk, he had already spent 3 weeks looking for exactly that person. He ran his own background check. What he found was exactly what her cover was designed to show, and one thing that wasn't in the brief, one small data point that a less careful person would have dismissed as coincidence. A financial consultation she had done 3 years earlier in Singapore for a shell company that, if you followed the corporate structure through 4 layers, connected back to a Kong subsidiary. It was not proof of anything, it was a thread. Saem Yoon pulled it. He found enough. Not everything, not the full picture, not Kong's name, not the specific nature of the operation she was running against him, but enough to know that she was not exactly what she appeared to be, and enough to understand that this meant he had something unusual, an operative inside his building who was working against him, whom he could allow to continue working against him while simultaneously working through her without her knowledge. He said yes to the consulting agreement. He brought her in. He gave her access, careful, curated access, enough to be convincing, not enough to expose anything that mattered, with a thin layer of genuinely useful information underneath to keep her engaged and reporting back to Kong that the operation was progressing. And then he began to use her. This is the part of the story where it becomes something other than a corporate thriller. Because what happened between Saem Yoon and Adele Nwosu over the following 4 months was not part of anyone's plan. Not his, not hers, not Kong's. She was in his building 3 days a week. She had a temporary office 2 floors below his. They had standing meetings every Thursday morning to review the African market analysis she was providing, which was genuinely excellent work because Adele was not the kind of person who did anything halfway, even when halfway would have been sufficient. He was different from every client or target she had worked around before, in a way that she spent a long time trying to identify and couldn't quite name. He was not warm exactly. He was contained, careful, watchful, the kind of person who had learned early that the people around you are not always who they present themselves to be. But there was a quality to the way he engaged with her that was unlike anything she had encountered in a professional context. He was completely present. He listened to the full sentence before forming a response. He remembered every specific thing she had ever said, and referenced it later in ways that suggested he had been thinking about it between conversations. He treated her like she was the most interesting person in the building. She told herself it was operational, that he was doing what she was doing, using attention as a mechanism, building rapport with strategic intent. She told herself this for about 6 weeks. By week 7, she had stopped believing it. They had dinner for the first time in late March. It was nominally professional, a client dinner at a restaurant in Gangnam with 2 other members of his strategy team. But somewhere between the second course and the end of the evening, the 2 other people at the table had ceased to be relevant to either of them, and they had talked for 2 hours about nothing that had anything to do with work. He told her about growing up as the youngest son in a family that had always been a business first and a family second, about the specific loneliness of being the one who saw things clearly in a room full of people who preferred not to, about the 5 years in New York that had been the first time in his life he had felt like himself rather than a role. She told him more than she had told anyone in 7 years. Not everything, not the real thing, not the job, not Kong, but the true things around the edges. Lagos, her mother, the feeling of being the one in the room who was always watching the room. She drove back to her hotel that night, and sat in the parking garage for 17 minutes before she could make herself go inside. She did not update her field notes. She told herself it was a complication, that she would manage it, that she had managed complications before. She had not managed this kind of complication before. Kang checked in at the end of April. The handler she reported to was a man she had only ever spoken to by phone, a voice she knew only as director, with a flat, patient tone that never changed regardless of what was being discussed. He wanted to know when she expected to have access to the long-range investment documents. She said she was close. He said close was not a timeline. She gave him a date. Then she spent 2 weeks trying to decide whether she was going to meet it. Because by the end of April, Adele Nwosu had understood something that she had spent 4 months trying not to understand. She was in love with Saem Yoon, not the operational version of it, not the kind of feeling that could be filed under professional complication and managed accordingly. The real kind. The inconvenient, structurally catastrophic kind that had no place in her life, her work, or the specific situation she was currently standing in the middle of. And Saem Yoon, the man she was in the building to destroy, was in love with her. She knew it the way you know things you don't want to know. From the way he looked at her when she was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. From the fact that he had, over 3 months, slowly rearranged his schedule around the 3 days a week she was in the building. From a Tuesday afternoon when she had made an offhand comment about a film she had seen years ago in Lagos, and the following Thursday he had found the director's other work and wanted to talk about it. He was paying attention the way people only pay attention to the things that matter most to them. She had a meeting with her handler in the first week of May. She reported minimal progress. She said the internal documents were more compartmentalized than anticipated. She bought herself 3 more weeks. She did not tell herself it was for the operation. The thing she did not know, the thing that was about to change everything, was that Saem had known for 11 weeks that she was working for Kang. And in those 11 weeks, he had not stopped whatever was growing between them. He had not pulled back, not put distance between them, not treated it as a liability. He had let it continue, and he had asked himself every day whether he was letting it continue because it served the operation or because he could not make himself stop it. He did not have a clean answer to that question. What he did have by the beginning of May was the complete internal case against his father and oldest brother. Every document, every transfer record, every falsified audit ready for submission to the Financial Services Commission. He had his attorney. He had his timing. He had everything he needed. And he had a problem. Because the moment the case went forward, the building would know who had assembled it. And the moment the building knew, anyone inside it who had been feeding information to an outside party would be exposed, including Adele. And Saem Yoon, who had spent 3 months watching himself fall for a woman he could not trust while trusting her with everything he felt. Saem Yoon did not want Adele Nwosu to be in the building when it fell. He called her, not to the office, to the glass conference room on the 32nd floor that was used for sensitive meetings and was the only room in the building without active recording. He put the gun on the table, not as a threat, but because he had been carrying it for 3 weeks after an anonymous warning from inside the Kang organization that someone in his building was under instructions to retrieve or destroy the internal case documents by any means necessary, and he was not going to be in a closed room without it. Then he put the folder on the table, the folder that contained everything he knew about Kang's operation, about her handler, about the specific documents Kang wanted, about the corporate intelligence trail that led, link by link, from Kang's inner circle back to the consultancy that had deployed her. And he waited for Adele to walk through the door. She came in, she saw the gun, she saw the folder, she looked at him. And she said it is over into her earpiece, because Kang was 3 floors below in a vehicle, and she needed to buy 30 seconds. And those were the only words that would do it without triggering an immediate escalation. Saem looked at her. He said, I know who sent you. I've known for 11 weeks. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Adele reached up, removed the earpiece, and placed it on the table between them. She said, How long have you known about the case? He said, Long enough to finish it. She said, And you kept meeting with me anyway. He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. In the parking structure below the building, Kong's driver received a signal from the earpiece that had gone silent, not a distress code, not a signal of completion, just silence, and relayed it upward. Kong, in the back of the vehicle, waited 3 minutes. Then he told the driver to leave. He had been in this business long enough to recognize the specific quality of an operation that had gone somewhere he could not follow. He did not know exactly what had happened on the 32nd floor. He knew that Adele Nwosu was not coming back down with what he had sent her for. He cut his losses, he left. That is the thing about Kong that nobody outside his circle fully understood. He was ruthless, but he was not reckless. He did not pursue operations that had turned. He moved on. There were other angles. There were always other angles. On the 32nd floor, Saem Yoon slid the folder fully across the table to Adele. He said, The case goes to the FSC tomorrow morning. My father and brother will be facing charges by Friday. The Yoon Group will survive it, the clean parts of it anyway. I've been structuring for that for 8 months. He said, After tomorrow, my name will be attached to this publicly. Kong will know I ran a counter-operation inside my own building. That makes me a target. He looked at her directly. He said, And I don't know who else you've been talking to or what they know or what they'll do when this comes out. So I need you to tell me everything. Not for the case. The case is done. For me. The pause that followed was the longest of Adele's adult life. 7 years of operational discipline told her to say nothing, to take the earpiece off the table, stand up, walk out of the building, and disappear into the machinery of exits and cover identities that she had maintained precisely for this moment. She told 7 years of operational discipline to be quiet. She told him everything. Not in that room. The conversation took 4 hours, eventually moving from the glass conference room to a bench beside the Han River as the sun went down over Seoul. She told him about Lagos and the consultancy and 7 years of work she had been good at and not once questioned, until she walked into a 14th floor office in February and met a man who listened to the full sentence. She told him about Kong, about the handler, about the specific documents she had been sent to retrieve, about the 3 weeks in April when she had stalled her own operation because she couldn't make herself finish it. He listened to all of it without interruption. When she finished, it was dark. The river was lit up with the reflection of the city. He said, The FSC case includes intelligence on Kong's financial network. It's not the whole picture, but it's enough to trigger an investigation. Kong is going to have bigger problems than either of us within the next 90 days. She said, That doesn't solve the immediate problem. He said, No, but it changes the geometry of it. She looked at the river. She said, I burned my cover here. I burned my relationship with Kong. I burned 7 years of professional discipline in a glass conference room this afternoon. He said, I know, I'm sorry. She said, Don't be sorry. I did it because I chose to. I need you to understand that, not because you asked, because I chose. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What do you want to do now? It was the right question. It was the only question. Not what she should do, not what was strategically correct, not what the situation required. What she wanted. She had not been asked that question in a very long time. She said she didn't know yet. She said she needed a few days to think. She said she was going back to Lagos first, not to run, just to stand somewhere that felt like the beginning of herself and figure out what the beginning of whatever came next looked like. He said, I'll be here when you decide. She said, You don't know what I'm going to decide. He said, I know, I'll be here anyway. The FSC case dropped the next morning at 9, exactly as Saem had said it would. The Yoon Group's internal fraud, 14 months of assembled evidence, 53 exhibits, 17 witness statements, hit the financial news by midday and was the lead story on every Korean business outlet by evening. Saem's father and oldest brother were taken in for questioning by Friday afternoon. The clean parts of the Yoon Group survived, as Saem had structured for them to. The strategy division which he ran was insulated. The logistics arm, which had never been touched by the fraud, kept operating. The real estate division entered a restructuring that Saem had designed 8 months earlier and now executed precisely on schedule. Kong's financial network, as Saem had predicted, came under FSC investigation within 30 days. Not because of Adele's confession, none of that was ever on any official record, but because the evidence trail in the FSC case included international transfer records that pointed, clearly enough for investigators who knew what they were looking at, toward the same network Kong had been running for 15 years. The investigation took 18 months. By the end of it, Kong had moved his primary operations out of Korea, and 2 of his senior partners had reached separate accommodation agreements with prosecutors. He was diminished. He was not destroyed. Men like Kong are rarely destroyed, but he was pushed back from the ground he had held, and that ground did not belong to him anymore. Adele went to Lagos. She spent 3 weeks in her mother's house in Ikja, sleeping in the room she had grown up in, eating her mother's cooking, walking the streets she had known before any of this. Her mother asked no questions. That was the gift of her. She had always known when her daughter needed to be somewhere quiet without having to explain why. Adele thought about 7 years of a life that had been built entirely around not being seen, around being in rooms without being in them, around giving people carefully constructed versions of herself and keeping the real one in reserve. It had been her protection. It had also been its own kind of captivity. She called Saem on the 15th day. She said, "I've been thinking about what I want." He said, "And?" She said, "I want to stop disappearing." He said, "Okay." She said, "I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know if it looks like Seoul or Lagos or something else entirely. I don't know what I'm going to do with 7 years of skills that were built for a specific kind of work I'm not doing anymore. I have a lot of unknowns." He said, "I'm good with unknowns." She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 3 weeks, and it surprised her. She said, "You know this is going to be complicated." He said, "Everything worth having is." She flew back to Seoul on a Sunday. He met her at the airport, which she had not expected and had not told him to do, which meant he had found out her flight information through means she chose not to examine too closely, and which she also chose not to hold against him, because she recognized a mirror of her own methods when she saw one. They did not have a clean beginning. There is no such thing, not when the history between 2 people includes the specific kind of complexity theirs did, the deception and the counter-deception, and the weeks where both of them had been simultaneously deceiving each other and feeling things they couldn't afford to feel. They did not pretend otherwise. They talked about it carefully, over a long period of time, in the way that people build something new from materials that were originally meant for something else. What they built was real, not easy real. There is a difference, and it is the difference that matters. Adele did not go back to the consultancy. She spent a year consulting independently on African market strategy, legitimately this time, for clients who wanted exactly what her actual expertise had always been. Then she was approached by a Korean-Nigerian trade organization working on investment policy between the 2 regions, doing the kind of work that sat at the intersection of everything she knew. She said yes. Saem rebuilt the Yoon Group strategy division over 3 years from the ground up, leaner, cleaner, with a governance structure he had designed himself, and that his remaining family members had very little choice but to accept, given the circumstances. It was not the empire his father had imagined passing down. It was something more durable. His grandmother, who was 83 and had watched 4 generations of Yoon men either build or destroy the family name in various proportions, met Adele for the first time at a dinner in Busan. She studied her for a very long time, with the focused silence of someone who has been reading people for 8 decades and does not need more than a few minutes to reach a conclusion. Then she said something to Saem in Korean that made him very still for a moment. She said, "This one sees through walls, be careful with her, and be worth it." He said, "I know." She had come in through the wrong door. She had been sent to take something from a man she had ended up choosing to protect. She had walked away from 7 years of careful invisibility to stand in the light of a situation that was inconvenient and complicated and entirely, completely her own. Adele Nwosu had spent 7 years being exactly what other people needed her to be. She spent the rest of her life being exactly who she was. It turned out those two things, for the first time, were the same. And that is the thing about finding someone who sees you, not the version you built, not the cover, not the performance, but the actual you, underneath all the layers you assembled to stay safe. It changes the geometry of everything. It makes the question of what you want feel less like a risk and more like the only question that was ever worth answering. Saem Yoon asked it first. On a bench by the Han River on the night everything fell apart and everything began. "What do you want?" She answered it 18 months later, standing in an airport in Seoul at 5 in the morning with 2 bags and a one-way itinerary that had 2 destinations on it and no fixed order. She went where she chose. She stayed as long as she wanted. She came back to Seoul because it was where he was and he was where she wanted to be, and that was the whole of the calculation. No operation, no handler, no file, just a choice made freely by a woman who had finally stopped disappearing. If this story kept you, if something in Adele's choice to step out of the shadows and into her own life hit somewhere real, then before you go anywhere, I need 3 things from you. Hit subscribe right now, because this channel is built for exactly this. The stories that move between worlds, between cultures, between the life people are sent to live and the one they choose. You do not want to miss what is coming next. And drop a comment. Tell me the moment that got you. Was it the gun on the table? Was it the earpiece going silent? Was it the bench by the river? Was it what his grandmother said? Tell me. I read every single one. The next story is already waiting. Stay with us.